Good morning, everybody. Well, today I felt the first nip of fall in the air, and that got me to thinking about soups and stews and all those types of comfort foods. And one of my very favorites is a Moroccan chickpea stew. And for those of you who don't know, chickpeas are just garbanzo beans. And I thought I would show you how I make that in the Instant Pot. So let's get started. The first thing you want to do is turn your Instant Pot on, press the saute mode, and your display will turn to on. And after the pot warms up, it will change to hot. It'll just say HOT on there. And as soon as your pot turns to hot, then you can go ahead and add your oil. I'm using 1/4 cup of olive oil. Okay, there you see it. I was always told hot pan, cold oil. So that's just what I've always done. So I'm just going to pour the oil in there, and it doesn't take very long for it to get warm. I usually just kind of swoosh it around a little bit. Okay, and give it just a second to warm up. And what I have here is just one large yellow onion, and I've diced it to be approximately the same size as a garbanzo bean. When your vegetables and your main ingredient like meat are the same size dice, they will cook in approximately the same amount of time. I think it's also nice for when you're actually eating it too. You don't get big chunks and little chunks and everything in between. All right, so throw those in there and you get a really nice sizzle going. You get every last bit. I love a good onion. All right. So we're just going to saute these and let them cook down a little bit until they start to get a little translucent. Meanwhile, go ahead and get your spices ready. So what I have here, I just put them all in one little dish. I have 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, which is a delicious Moroccan spice. It's probably not just Moroccan, but they use this spice in Morocco there, from what I understand. And I also have a teaspoon of paprika, and I have a teaspoon of cumin. And just wait for the onions to get done, and you can add that in there. Not to mention that there's also a little dash of cayenne pepper in there, about 1/8 of a teaspoon, and that just brings in a little bit of heat, not too much. If you want it spicier, go ahead and increase the cayenne pepper a little bit if you want. It just gives it a little bit of a little kick. The onions are coming along nicely, and now the next ingredient you want to add is garlic. Now this garlic is pressed with an actual garlic press. You could also use a grater, but what you probably don't want to do for this recipe is dice it, only because you'll get little bites of garlic potentially, and I like a little smoother consistency. So just plop all that in there. That is 7 cloves of garlic, my friends. It sounds like a lot, but this recipe can take it, and it isn't too overpowering. So just stir that in there. Just get it all mixed in and be careful not to burn it. But I think you'll be fine because these onions have quite a bit of moisture. Okay, so just give that about a minute or so. Okay, this is smelling so good. Okay, now you might have heard that it's often really good to add spices into oil because that helps them bloom and it releases the oil that they have naturally. So all of that spice is going in. Again, cinnamon, paprika, cumin, and a little bit of cayenne pepper. So I'm just going to stir that in there and just let it cook for a minute or so. You'll start smelling it. Oh, and it's wonderful. A lot of people don't think about putting cinnamon in a soup. That's just because in America that's not something we do very often. But it's awfully good in this one. So just give that a moment. And the next thing you want to do is you want to just take a 14-ounce can of diced tomatoes, juice and all, and stir that in. And then you also want to get 4 cups of broth. Now if you're vegetarian or you just want to do a meatless dish, use vegetable broth. And that's usually what I do, but I actually didn't have any, but I'm going to use 4 cups of chicken broth. And this is just going to go right on in. Those plops, that's, when you make bone broth, it becomes a little gelatinous, and so that's just what that is. I had some gelatinous bone broth in there, so don't be concerned. It's supposed to be like that. Okay, give that a little bit of a stir. And then now I'm going to add in my chickpeas. And so what I have here, they're just canned chickpeas, 3 14-ounce cans that I drained, and I rinsed them really well. Get all that slimy stuff from the can off of them. Give that a nice stir. We're still on saute mode because we want to heat this mixture up. The hotter your contents are, the quicker it will come up to pressure. So we're just going to move right along. Now that we've got that, we want to put in about a ½ teaspoon of ground pepper and a couple pinches, about a teaspoon or so of kosher salt. I use low sodium chicken broth, so if you use a low sodium broth, you can put a little bit more salt in, but if you use a regular broth, I would start with less. But even so, I think I'm just going to start with ½ teaspoon of salt for right now. You can always add more later, and stir that in. And then one last ingredient that might seem a little bit strange, but it's nice because with all the tomato and stuff you have in there, is just a teaspoon of sugar. And that really brings out the spices and adds a little something to it. It's not that much. And if you don't want to add sugar, I'm sure it'll still be good without it. But this is how the recipe is written. And it turns out delicious every time. Okay, so I'm going to just let that warm up for just a second, and I will be right back. So I'm back, and what I did, I had to go get a paper towel because you can see I've got a little something spilled on the edge of my inner liner here. And I want to seal the pot now, but I do not want to have any goo on the pot where the seal is. So the first thing I do is I make sure that the silicone liner is all in there, and close my lid, set the knob to the sealing position. And then I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to cancel the saute mode now because we're going to pressure cook this. So I'm going to use manual, and then you can see it's already on high pressure, and this one defaulted to 5 minutes, but we're going to give it a little bit more time than that. And actually I'm going to do 12 minutes on this one. And then we will let it naturally release for about 15 minutes or so. Whenever you make a soup or a stew in your Instant Pot, for safety's sake, I think it's really better to let it naturally release for a little while after the cooking cycle ends. And if you've ever had any liquid spew out of your knob here when you go to manually release the pressure, well, that's because it didn't get to sit long enough on natural release. So let it go for a while. And then when we come back and naturally release the pressure, I'll show you how I release it with a full pot of stew or soup. Okay? See you in a bit. Okay, so the cooking cycle has ended and it has been naturally releasing pressure for 23 minutes. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn it off, and I'm going to start to let out the remaining pressure. And what I usually do is I'll take a spoon that has a little hole in it, or I'll just use the top of the spoon, and I'll just slowly start to release it. Oh, but you know what? There's not much left in this one, so I'm just going to let it go. Sometimes if you don't let it set for as long as I did, you have the risk of stuff spewing out of here with the steam, but this is nothing. Oh, look, the pin already dropped. So now we know that it is safe to open up the lid and see what we've got. I always open it away from my face. It's kind of not the type of facial that I really want to get. And then don't forget you've got this handy dandy lid holder right there. And look at that. It looks beautiful. Beans are tender. Alright, so what I do at this point is I get just a handy dandy potato masher and I just start mashing the beans. I don't use an immersion blender because I don't want this to be a creamy soup. I want this to be a soup that has some texture and that's, you know, kind of rustic in nature. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a few more mashes and then I'll come right back. Okay, so I gave it a few more mashes. I didn't mash every last chickpea. You can see that there's still a few whole ones in there. And I mean, it thickens up a little bit, but it's a stew. You know, it's not a chowder, so this is going to be a little bit soupy. And what I went ahead and did was I gave it a little taste because at this point is when I would adjust my salt. But honestly, I'm so glad I stopped at a half of a teaspoon of kosher salt because that was perfect. I'm not going to add any more. One last step, and boy, does this make a difference. It also makes it really healthy. I have here about 8 ounces of baby spinach leaves, and I'm just going to pop those in the pot. You know how spinach is. You can put 10 pounds in there and you're going to come out with like a cup. And just pop it in there and sort of smush it down. Oh my gosh. So nice. You know, it's funny. I brought this soup to a family gathering and it was just one of those things I just wanted to experiment and see if anybody would like it. It was really fun because they loved it, and my brother-in-law George ended up having like 2 helpings, which was really neat. It's always satisfying when your family loves what you cook. And look at that. It just wilts right down on in there, and it looks gorgeous, and it's so healthy. And like I said, if you use vegetable broth, you've got a vegetarian dish here. And I used my chicken broth. All right. There you have it. Isn't that beautiful? And it is delicious. I wish you could smell what I'm smelling right now. So this is Instant Pot Moroccan Chickpea Stew. I hope you make it, and I hope you enjoy it as much as my family and I do. See you later, guys.